Welcome to the OPSQC podcast, helping entrepreneurs, innovators, and small business owners scale to profitability. The goal of this podcast is to showcase real businesses, real owners, tell their stories, learn a little, and have some fun while doing it. Today, please welcome Mark James, President and Lead Advisor at Performance Advisors, based in the greater Chicago area. Performance Advisors are business process improvement practitioners with over 40 years of experience in a diverse range, mid-size to Fortune 50 companies. His experience is in the B2B space, where he helps companies eliminate barriers relative to people, processes, strategic planning and development, and precision marketing.
Good to see you. Good morning, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here.
Thanks for being on the show here. To start, could you give the listeners a little bit of color around Performance Advisors in your own words?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Performance Advisors Group, I started in 2017, and it is a culmination of 40 plus years prior to that, doing the things that my business does. And I put the business together based upon my observations and experience working with all different kinds of companies in all different sorts of verticals over 40 plus years. And what I noticed is that there are some common themes that relate to barriers that get in the way of a business being able to perform at a higher state. So I put the business together, and I actually chose that name because I wanted to use that term performance and the fact that we advise businesses on how they can improve their performance and eliminate those barriers that quite often get in the way. And candidly, they're performance barriers that are quite common, and they're agnostic in terms of barriers from one industry to the next.
Sure. So when you formed this company, what was the goal? Like, what objective did you have in forming Performance Advisors?
Well, the objective was, first of all, from a personal standpoint, I have a long bucket list that I want to accomplish in life, and you can't do that without, having a job and making money. So that's obviously one obvious motivation. But beyond that, then my passion was really fueled by, with all those observations over 40 plus years, one of the things that pains me is to see a business struggle or actually outright fail because they lack the ability to kind of see some of the stuff that's right in front of them in their own business. So I felt my passion, and the best way I can serve businesses is to be that independent set of eyes and ears to help them identify the things that they're maybe missing because they're so close to the business. And I'll give you a very quick story, if you don't mind, about where I first observed that early on in my career. Out of college, I spent 9.5 years in the oil business, and I was in sales and marketing roles. And my first job was a retail rep, which means that I had a territory of retail service stations on the east side of metropolitan Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was responsible for recruiting the dealers for those franchise locations, working with them to develop their business, selling them products, helping with business management, and so on. And one of the things that I observed is that little things that the public regarded as important, sometimes a business owner in that business or any business would miss. And the best example was even some of my best dealers from a business standpoint, they missed little things like the berm area around their station. Most petroleum gasoline stations are on a corner. So there's a road going one way and the other. So you've got two sides of a berm where you've got either landscaping and or grass. And what would tend to happen is the business owner was so busy with his business that the weeds would kind of get out of hand in the landscaping beds. The lawn wouldn't get mowed. Another one that I was very, very, very hot on is the first thing I always did when I went into a location. I went and I took the restrooms. Mm-hmm. We all know what it's like to be traveling and going into a dirty restroom. Not a good thing. And it shows poorly, and it showed poorly on the brand as well as that dealer operator. So I learned early on that, helping a business owner identify those things that they're missing, not because they're sloppy or they don't care. They're just so busy that they don't see the forest for the trees sometimes, literally.
I think you hit on a key thing there. We see that a lot is you come in and provide an unbiased view. A lot of times we get so, like you said, tied up in the dailiness and like the activities of running the business. Mm-hmm. To take a step back and really look at things from more of a 30,000 foot view is extremely important. So I think that's what you're saying you do is you come in, you're looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective.
Yes.
And plus you have this 40 years of experience. So you can use those things in combination to maybe point out some things that aren't as obvious to people.
Exactly. And I actually have developed over years, and I did it in conjunction with a gentleman who's a very good colleague of mine. And in a previous business that I ran, he was my lead advisor. And his background is adult educational instructional design and organization development. And he developed what I call the performance puzzle. And I use that performance puzzle today, and that this would be one way that kind of serves that desire to help and help business owners see the forest for the trees. Most efforts at improving business that I have observed tend to look at the business from a functional standpoint or a hierarchical standpoint. The performance puzzle basically takes a more holistic view of the determinants of behavior and performance in the business of both people and processes. So I take that performance puzzle and look at a dozen or so factors within that and use that performance puzzle to help identify what are those barriers that are in the way that maybe are going missed, or that the owner's scratching their head going, I can't get my hands around the fact that people seem off topic, off task, or there's a lot of complaining about management, or I got turnover increasing, but I don't know where the root causes are. So I'll use the performance puzzle to do that. One of the very common places where I find root causes for people performance in the organization starts at the leadership level, the nature and kind of leadership and how good they are at expressing and making sure that expectations are clearly understood, that they're formulating and constantly reinforcing the values, mission, and vision of the business. And then at the local level, the local manager or supervisor, they are critical in terms of performance of the organization. And there's all sorts of research to back up the fact that the performance of managers at a local level is the greatest determinant of variation in engagement scores of employees from one business to the next.
Sure. No, that's a fact.
I like using that particular model because it's more holistic, and you don't get stuck in looking at hierarchy or function only.
Talking about that performance puzzle, is that something that is part of your service offering, or is that something you outline? Maybe it's like a freebie. How is that used in your business template? It's
a technique that I use. I wouldn't say it's proprietary because I want to give credit to Don McCormick, who developed it, and he developed it in conjunction with what he was doing with me and my business at the time. But I use it as it's a technique in the diagnosis phase when I'm working with a client. Mm-hmm. So it's not patented by me. It's just a unique way of looking at things, and it's a sort of a methodology, if you will.
Sure. And you talk about the employee engagement piece, and that's something that you and I are aligned. I'm really big on that. If your employees are not aligned with the leadership, which comes back to what you said, there's a communication translation gap between leadership and people executing it. That is a common problem. And really leadership should be striving to bridge that gap as much as possible. And I know employee engagement is a term, it's used a lot lately, and people use it in a lot of different contexts. And at the simplest root form in my mind is people at all levels interacting, not just, leaders interacting with other leaders or leaders interacting with, the guy in the maintenance department, but people all levels, because I'm a firm believer that everybody can be a leader in the organization at some point in time based on their subject matter expertise. But getting everybody really communicating well, right? And by well, I think going into the piece of there's the topic of communication where you are relaying a message, but is that message being received? And is it being received correct? So that sounds like that's something that you actually provided some coaching in that avenue. Is that correct?
I do. I'm not a leadership coach per se. I align myself with people that do leadership coaching. But what I do spend a lot of time with in an organization at the leadership level is working with those leaders to help them understand that one of their core responsibilities is to do a couple, three things. And I've mentioned them already, but I'll repeat them. Number one, making sure that the expectations are clearly and unambiguously communicated to the organization, that people understand what they need to do. One of my favorite and unsettling statistics is research by the Conference Board several years back. They determined that for a typical organization, 2/3 of the employees are only 1/3 as productive as they could be because they simply don't understand what they're being asked to do.
Sure.
That's clearly a communication issue.
Yeah.
Related to that, another equally unsettling statistic based on research by Human Capital League Again, for a typical organization, only 42% of the employees understand their own company's values, mission, and vision. So if we accept that those three things help formulate and communicate to the world, to your distribution channel or to customers, what experience or what am I going to see or encounter when I do business with this company? If more than half of the people don't understand what those things are, it's very hard to deliver on them. And
Sure.
it's a responsibility of leadership. So I quite often will, maybe not in so many words, depending on the conversation, but let's start by doing the equivalent of you, Mr. and Ms. Leader, looking in the mirror and asking yourself some questions around: am I clearly communicating expectations, and is my team doing that? Am I constantly reinforcing values, mission, and vision? Because it's not enough to put it on the break room wall and call your values, mission, and vision properly communicated. And then lastly, are you willing as a leader to ask one simple question that takes some courage to do it, but be willing to ask your people, tell us what we're doing wrong. Yeah. And then number two, listen and respond, because your people are your eyes and ears, and they could be in many more places at one time than you could ever be. So having that dialogue with them and asking them and being willing to listen, but you also have to respond, because the first time you ask and you don't respond, the next time you ask, you're going to hear crickets. So around leadership, that's a lot of time is spent around that, because communication or lack of it or poor communication is a very common cause of performance issues in a business.
I chuckle because you and I are definitely see eye to eye on that one. Is a lot of people ask questions, right? One of my favorite ones is when people ask you, how can I help? And you tell them, okay, well, here's something I need. And you never hear anything back. You never hear any feedback. You never see any action taken on it. And what does that say to the employee? What message are you really providing to someone? I actually talked about that in my Voice of Customer presentation the other day. Great point. I'm glad you hit on that. So looking at your business, Mark, are you a solopreneur? Do you have contractors who work for you? Do you have people that are direct hires? How do you structure your business?
Yeah, my business I'm a solo owner of the business, a sub-S corporation. And I have an outsourced resource business model, which I've perfected over the years. This is the second business I've done where I've used this model. And so what that means in my business is that because of my experience in the time I've been on the planet doing what I'm doing, I've met a lot of people who are really good at what they do in areas like organization development, learning and training, communication tactics, marketing, data and analytics, and we can trust each other with our livelihoods. And so I align myself with those people so that when I encounter a particular situation or a need or a certain set of root causes or a single root cause with a business, I go to those outsourced resource people and I pick the people I need to exactly fit what the client needs, no more, no less, which ends up being one of my differentiators. With that kind of a model and approach, I can, by definition, eliminate a lot of overhead that a lot of large consulting firms will charge their clients. The large consulting firms are good at what they do, but their business model is pretty expensive. Sure. They bring a lot of MBAs in, maybe right out of college, and throw them at a project, and that's all overhead that customers are paying for, whether they need it or not. So I eliminate that by bringing in seasoned people. I don't train people on my clients' dimes. So these are seasoned people, experienced. They know the stuff, and they're going to work. We're going to work directly on what the client's need is, no more, no less.
Very good. So looking at how you came to this point to create this business, right? And you can talk in a minute about what drove you to become a consultant in this regard. Maybe before that, if you can give a little bit more background around your 4 years of experience in big corporate America, what kinds of projects did that entail? You talked about the oil and gas one a little bit, but I know from our conversations, you've worked with some other big corporations like Caterpillar. Can you talk about that briefly and then talk about that pivotal moment where you decided to go and become a consultant?
Yeah, I guess the path that led me to where I am today it's where we are today as a result of the path we've driven or we've taken. And for me, my whole career, my career started in the oil business, as I mentioned, 9.5 years with Union Oil Company of California. I was in a series of sales and marketing roles. So I was classically trained to sell products. And then ultimately, as I moved out of the oil business and went into the incentive and motivation business, I became very adept and was formally trained in selling intangibles. And when you're in the selling in the intangibles world, you learn very quickly that you need to understand really what the client's needs are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about selling toilet paper, health and beauty aids. I'm talking about helping businesses solve things that are not easily solved as it relates to people performance or intangibles that are very hard to get your hands around. So my experience in working with all that is I observed and I've noticed what worked and what didn't. So I was constantly taking notes at the time in my head and physically, so that when I got to a point where I decided I didn't want to be in the corporate world any longer, and I always knew that I wanted to be in business for myself, and I had done it before, and so I had a short stint back in the corporate world. But I decided quickly, no, I was really cut out long-term to be in business for myself. And so I said, I'm going to take those thousands of hours that I spent learning and developing and helping to deliver the right solutions. I'm going to take that and I'm going to help businesses solve those issues so I can help eliminate pain and give them peace of mind that they're always struggling for, or help them to prevent falling into the tar pits of business that exist in the first place.
Sure.
So.
When you talk about that, there's things that you didn't enjoy about the corporate world, things that you were more geared towards being a consultant. What were those attributes? What were those characteristics that drove you to do that?
I would say part of it is the culture of the family I grew up in. We were taught to be self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And so that would be one factor. The second factor that I observed in business, in being in corporations, and this is not meant to be cast aspersions on corporations or big businesses in general, but one of the things that I personally experienced was and there were a number of people around me that were experiencing the same thing, that we were being told how to do our jobs by people who had never had to do it themselves. There are a lot of reasons for why those people are in the roles they were in. I won't go into that, but I was basically kind of tired of being told how to do my job by people who never had to do it, because when I did it and I did it the way I felt the best, that's when I was most successful. Mm-hmm. So just the sense of being an individual, you're responsible for your own actions. It's what I'm going to do in life that's going to make it possible for me to do stuff. I'm not looking for a freebie. I'm not looking for a handout. I'm going to have to make it on my own. And so I decided that the best way for me to do that is to offer back what I've learned. I go back to a comment that a very good colleague of mine said to me several years ago. He says, it's time you start getting paid for what you know, not just what you do. Yeah,
I think so. That's a great point about in this hierarchy. I mean, because I used to work in big corporate America too, and it's different now than it was 20 years ago. It's vastly different. I mean, there's a lot more progressive thinking, a lot more accepting of outside ideas. But it used to be more, like you said, people told you what to do, and that's what you had to do. Your thoughts weren't really as valued. So you're kind of jumping out on your own. You're testing the waters to see if your ideas and your true uniqueness that you're bringing to the proposition holds water. Right? You're trying to test it and see if it's a true value. That's really what you're doing, because that gives yourself validity, right?
Yes. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I do not mind being responsible for my own actions. One of the other things that I think we can all relate to at some time or another in a corporate career, you're going to be on the receiving end of decisions that you have no control over, that have a material effect on your life. And they can be really good effects or outcomes, or they can be really not good outcomes. So by definition, I avoid that, and we all do, by being in business for ourselves. We still have a responsibility, and we still are responsible for our own consequences. But I'd rather make decisions and know that I solely have to answer myself, and I'm not necessarily the victim of what I call stupid corporate mistakes.
Sure.
So that was another driving factor. But I don't mean to, I don't mean to say that all my corporate experience was negative. I had plenty of positive experiences.
Sure.
And and had some good steps along the way, and met some great people, all of which factors into what's up here that I can help people with, and what to embrace, what to stay away from.
Absolutely. So you've been doing this a while. Who are some key friends, family, and even others, within your circle that were really they dove in and supported you in this journey?
Well, I'll start with my family, and I alluded to that a moment ago. My mom and dad owned and operated a retail business, a jewelry store, for 54 years. They started the business in 1950. I was born in 1953, and I grew up in a small business family. And we should never underestimate that the wheels of commerce don't begin to turn until somebody sells something. And typically those wheels don't turn until somebody buys something at retail. So, my advice to anybody today is that everybody should have at least some experience in a retail job, even if it's just packing groceries in a local grocery store or working at the local fast food joint. Understanding what happens at retail really drives the rest of the world. So I grew up in a small business family, and I was taught at a very early age that a couple little things. When the customer walks into the store, you acknowledge them. When you're talking with them, you treat them with respect. You do all those things that are just kind of common sense that sometimes we can forget. Mm-hmm. Another piece of advice that my dad told me when I had gone off to college, and my first job was in the oil business, and I had that retail rep job. And I asked him, I said, "You have a lot of sales guys that call on you, or salespeople that call on you that sell you products. What in your mind differentiates the really good salespeople from the ones that aren't so good?" And without hesitation, he said, "It's the ones that do the little things for you, that remember you. They do the little things, because the big stuff kind of takes care of itself." So I always try to live by that. I don't always succeed, but I try to live by that. And my dad passed on not too long after I started my first business. So they haven't been around for this, but that advice really helped me. Beyond that, then my two close friends of mine, one I grew up with in my hometown in central or north central Illinois, who is my CPA to this day. Okay. Offering sage advice. And then my attorney, who I met in college, who thinks as a business person first and a lawyer second. They have been very influential in helping support me in what I've done in my business, and reminding me sometimes of those things that you can forget as an entrepreneur, like stay away from this target. Yeah.
Well, you always should have a good attorney, and yes, a good CPA definitely helps as well. So those are two very valuable resources.
Yeah, they are.
Backing up, it's kind of interesting. You talk about this time period working in retail, and you talk about that. There's some basic common sense things you do, and what I see happening is I see some of those elements have been missing as the digital economy has really ramped up e-commerce. And what's really interesting is I see people adopting more tools and techniques that cater back to those points you were just talking about, like just having a customer show up, the acknowledgement of, "Hey, how are you doing? How's your day going? How can I help?" I mean, there's actually, obviously programs and automation and bots being used for that type of activity, but I find it interesting that the e-commerce world is recognizing that those tools were important, that those acknowledgements were important. So yes, it's interesting how everything kind of comes full circle. Like here you have a people process that was very effective. It went digital. There's something missing. Now we see those processes creeping back in from the digital side.
Well, I think it's based upon experience, and I think where you see the return of those kinds of little things, I think it's driven by the fact that another unsettling statistic that I quite regularly will refer to, and I first saw this statistic when I was in the oil business. It was research that the Canadian Manufacturers Association had done, and ever since that I've sort of tracked the research around this. And it's kind of research that's in the public domain. There are several different sources for it, but the numbers haven't really changed. The number one reason that people or businesses lose customers who leave and go someplace else to buy, number one reason, almost 7 out of 10 times when customers leave, they leave because they encountered a poor attitude or indifference to their business by the people serving them, by the supplying company. The second most frequent reason, at 14% of the time, so literally 4 times less, then the number one reason is dissatisfaction with the product and service itself. So it's very clear that that the little things you do to make people feel welcome and wanted, and that you appreciate their business, cannot be understated. And I'll go so far as to say too that I have yet to encounter, and this is sort of like convince me otherwise, one of those convince me otherwise challenges. I have yet to encounter a technology or anything else that can overcome an employee who doesn't make a customer feel welcome and wanted.
Yes, that's a great point. Very, very, difficult situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you treat your customers right from the customer experience, start to end, and you value them, even if there is something wrong, right? If they encounter a poor attitude or whatever, there's ways to interject and to get involved to try and mitigate that. But if they do hit that point where it's bad service, bad product, right? I think the numbers speak for themselves. Like you said, 14% of the time it's going to leave, but it's 4 times greater if they just feel like they're not being valued.
Period. Yeah, and by the way, price isn't even on near the top of the list at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, another point around that is the fact that the need to make sure people feel welcome and wanted can actually increase when there's a product with the product or service. There's plenty of research to show customer satisfaction research. Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was actually research that Caterpillar had done of some of their machine customers.
Okay.
And they found, and I've seen other examples of it in other industries, that your customer satisfaction scores are actually higher among customers who had a product or service issue that was resolved properly, as opposed to a customer that purchased the product or service and never had an issue. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, the satisfaction scores go up when you're given an opportunity to properly and efficiently and quickly solve a customer's problem around your own product and service.
That's why every company out there should embrace, if they have an issue, embrace that opportunity. Do your best, put your best foot forward to fix that as quickly as
it's an opportunity to show that you're going to stand by what you sell or what you do. I've often coached people when I've had employees in the past, mm-hmm. And when I work now with my consortium partners or my outsourced resource partners, I call them my consortium. I say that we're not perfect. We're not perfect, and I'll tell a client this. You're gonna get our best. That's my promise to you, and I will deliver what I promise. And if I can't do something, I will let you know and I'll help you find it. But if something does go wrong, we're going to step up. We're going to own it. And at that point, the best thing we can do is do our best to be part of the solution. That's all you can do. Don't run from it. Don't try to hide. Don't try to make excuses. Just own it. Just own it.
Absolutely.
Because people will respect you more.
Sure. So being a solopreneur, I'm imagining this was a bootstrap type of startup. You were self-funding in that regard. So mm-hmm. from there, now you've got your consulting presence, business established. You kind of have an idea what you want to do because you've got all this years of experience to build on. What does it take to get momentum? Because the thing I see with small businesses and sales owners, and I think Paul Van Meter illustrated it really well, is they go through this thing where you have your sales cycle, you're selling, then you're no longer selling because you're working, then you run out of work and I got to sell again, right? So did you go through that cycle? And how did you bridge that?
Yeah, I worked for a gentleman, and when I was in the incentive and motivation business, really cool guy, and he called that the dolphin effect. Dolphin going through the water up and down.
Yep.
Very common challenge, especially for a small business where you don't have a lot of resources you can tap into. Mm-hmm. So you have to manage your day and your time very carefully, and always make sure that you're leaving time to keep your pipeline full, and always remind yourself, I don't want to be on that dolphin effect roller coaster. So it's a very common occurrence, and I've fallen into it as well. But I think I'm smarter about it now. So mm-hmm. I think about I'm going to make sure that I've got resources doing the delivery stuff.
Sure.
Where I need to be involved in deployment, I'm going to make sure that I have to come back and do the things that only I can do as the lead sales guy for the business. Fortunately, in today's world, it's easier because of something called a simple little concept called virtual assistants. Mm-hmm. And virtual assistants, there are VAs out there that can do literally anything you need for a business. So mm-hmm. you should avail yourself of them.
Absolutely. I'm a self-proclaimed Fiverr user. I use other platforms like that as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely tap into the resources out there. I mean, the gig economy is in full effect, right?
Yes.
I think we're seeing this kind of shift to more subject matter expertise, even from big companies, right? I mean, why have a person full-time on staff if you don't need a full-time person? You can go and you can get the expertise where you need, bring them in. It's more project oriented. And Fiverr, you know, especially for the VA type stuff, a lot of those things are very affordable in that regard. So,
they are, yeah. And the expectation is, look, you're not. They know they're not being hired, not being hired to be there for be with you like a full-time employee. They know that at some point the gig's going to end, or it may get extended, or they'll come back to you later on. But yeah,
well, they know their quality of work is going to reflect the future projects available too. So, I mean, because there's a feedback mechanism. I think that's really important that those platforms really do a good job of including the feedback mechanism.
Yep. Agreed.
So which service do you have, Mark, that gets the most demand? Because I think you offer a couple different things, right? There's advisorship. I do know you do public speaking. Which of your services gets the most demand?
Right. It kind of changes over time, but probably for the last, well, really since about 2018, it has really been on the most of the focus has been on people performance within companies, followed closely by process performance, because the two are so integral to one another. And then probably second would be marketing solutions for clients. Third would be change management, only because change management is that's not necessarily a service where a client needs it all the time. They're not going through a restructuring or a merger and acquisition, but there are always performance issues with people and process. The nice thing about going back to my performance puzzle that I use, very rarely, when you look at all the determinants of performance in an organization, very rarely does even the best business in the world always fire in all 8 cylinders all the time. There's always something that needs attention or needs work.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's amazing with larger companies, you know, it's almost like they have a persona of their own. It's almost like they have a personality of their own. And that company 10, 20 years ago, based on leadership changes, management changes, personnel changes, product offering changes, right, may not be the same company it is today, right?
Yes.
Because of just this shift in dynamic. So sometimes they need help to go through those shifts, especially if they're a drastic or a very severe one, maybe going into a totally different niche than they're used to.
Yeah, there are, I don't remember the exact number. Maybe you know what it is, Jared, but well over half of the business that were in the S&P 500 or the Fortune 500 30 years ago are no longer there.
Right.
Constantly changing. And a lot of that is because they failed to adapt. They couldn't keep up, or they got stuck in a paradigm. You know, the old knock on railroads struggling was that railroads failed to understand that they were in the transportation business.
Right.
And having a different view of things.
And that's interesting, because I've been reading this book called Play Bigger, which because we're predictive index consultants, actually came with the onboarding package. Real interesting book that talks about category kings. Okay? Says the first adopters who get into it, who really kind of appeal to mass market and figure out the process and really nail it down, those are the ones that are going to succeed. And you'll find this whole big influx. And it used to be like Silicon Valley used to invest in, you know, a lot of different companies that were coming in on tailwinds of that. So it's like, okay, if you're in internet, technology, IoT, let's just say, you put IoT on it. Well, venture capital was throwing tons of money at you just because you're in IoT, right? Because it's going to be a big space. But when you look at it, the companies that really make money on that were the first ones in there who really had a scalable process and really understood the market. All these guys later on, 5, 10, 15 years later, they may not be around because either gone out of business, consolidated, or something else. So it's a really interesting concept I've just recently been studying more about, is this category kings, right? And it kind of plays back to who's in the S&P 500. Well, any of those, NASDAQ, Dow, S&P 500, those are the guys at the time who are the category kings. But just because you're a category king now doesn't mean you're going to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. unless you are constantly iterating, right?
Yep.
It goes back to the concept of iterating, bringing in the right people, continuing to improve that process, really aligned with that customer need.
Right. Well, perfect example at retail. Think about this for a second. When Walmart came along, and they put a very big crimp on a lot of local businesses where they moved into markets, including my parents' jewelry store. I mean, Walmart was selling jewelry. Who would have thought? Right. And so everybody thought, well, Walmart owns the world now. Well, who would have thought at that time that Walmart would now be competing against something called Amazon, where I order it and I have it tomorrow, or in some cases I get it today without leaving the comfort of my home. And there'll be some paradigm that will come along that will challenge Amazon. I don't know what that is, but if Amazon doesn't adapt, even though they're the king right now, as you describe it, they won't be the king for long. You know, a book that I read many years ago. In fact, it was a gentleman that we used some of his materials when we were doing some stuff with process and continuous improvement with Caterpillar. Remember Joel Barker? He was he was big on, you know, avoiding and getting stuck in paradigms in your business.
Yep.
And he talked about at that time, and I think it's still true in business, and it's related to what you're saying, and that is you can either be a pioneer or a settler. And the pioneers are the ones you're describing, who go out and they blaze the trail, they take the risks, and they go out and they find the opportunity. And the settlers are the ones that look out into out there and they keep asking a question: is it safe out there yet?
Sure. And
eventually they'll get an answer back from the pioneers: yeah, it's safe out here, but there's nothing left for you.
There's two things I'm going to comment about that, and then we can move on to another topic, because this is a great topic I love to talk about. Cryptocurrency. So think about that, right? You have this brand new space. Bitcoin's one of the first ones, you know, Satoshi Nakamoto. Ethereum comes in right behind. And then all of a sudden you got all these coins come in. Everybody's developing their own coins for everything. And, you know, I just was posting about Dogecoin the other day because we've got Elon Musk talking about that.
Yeah.
It crops up. Well, 3 days ago, or a couple days ago, I posted about this saying, hey, you know, kind of be hesitant before you jump in with both feet on this thing, especially as much as it's ramped up, because this is not a category king, right? To the point of, this is not a Bitcoin or Ethereum. Ethereum, in my mind, I love it because it's a very purposeful technology. It can be branched and widely used. I see the purpose in it. But Dogecoin, literally, Elon goes on SNL, tells us about what a hustle it is, and 30% it drops overnight, and everybody's abandoning shit. But, you know, and I hate to say it, but we used to call those shit coins when we were mining like that. Dogecoin was one of those we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, not purposeful. Why even go through it? So I always warn people, invest only what you're willing to lose, especially in crypto.
Exactly.
But it goes back to the category kings of Bitcoin and Ethereum are doing very well. I mean, lately they've been 10%, 10%, 10%. They're maintaining over time because they're one of the first. They're one of the first. They blaze a trail, and it was about serving the purpose when the need was there, right? And the other point I was going to make is, you talked about railroads. And yes, railroads fell from grace, right? But now let's look at 2020 and 2021. Railroads are going great guns right now. I mean, they are the cheapest option to move freight from point A to point B across this country. They're getting a big lift with infrastructure renewals through the current administration. I look at, you know, railroads have been given a new life, I think, in this regard. So it goes to show you that be a category king, take advantage of opportunity. Well, by opportunity, I'm saying like a pandemic or, you know, other things like that are going to hinder your competition. So never fail to capitalize on a good opportunity.
Right. And if you got knocked off, doesn't mean you're done. How well are you going to adapt to get back to where you were? To use your point with the railroads.
Goes back to change management, right? Just how do you iterate? How do you constantly iterate to get better? This is good stuff.
It does.
So I know you've been on webinars. You've done some speaker panels here recently. Can you elaborate on some of the more memorable ones you've been on, some of the recent ones?
Yeah, the most recent one I did about 2 weeks ago. It was really a gratifying one from the standpoint that we brought together a group of people that represented the technology side of an enterprise or technology solutions, myself talking about the people aspect, and then a gentleman who's one of my outsourced resource partners who is really good at business process management, lean business design. He's one of the best I've seen. He's done work around the world Been with IBM, been with General Motors, just knows his stuff very well. And the panel discussion was around the importance of making sure that you integrate your people, your processes with technology. The dirty little secret about putting technology into a business is that about 10% of what you need to address is the technology itself. Most of what you need to address to make sure you're going to be successful when you deploy it has to do with the people and the process side of it. If your people don't know how to use it, they're not willing to adopt it, or there are other factors such as politics or silos or just different ways of doing things that people don't want to change. If you don't address those issues, your technology is not going to be as successful as it could be. And equally important, you've got to integrate it into your processes, because if you don't, again, you're not going to be aligned across those three things. So it was a great discussion. We got some good questions around how do you actually affect all that. And from my point of view, a lot of it was around the people part.
It's really interesting to me because this is a great point to hone in on the use of tech, right? So everybody thinks about their cell phones here, right? And cell phones are such a great item, but if you're not using it properly, it's going to hinder you. A couple months ago, I went through a distraction disruptor, Stephen Kotler, Dorian Rios. It's an online platform. You go in, you do, half hour to an hour a day. But one of the key things they had me do on this was just go in your apps and just turn off your notifications. Just, because your phone's constantly buzzing all the time. But if you really want your phone to work for you, turn off all your notifications. Use your phone when you want to. Make sure you can be accessed, or people can get a hold of you by the people that are most important to you. And then you take control back of your time. So that's an important point, definitely, illustrating how tech can work against you or work for you.
Yes.
I like the piece you're talking about too, which is put the time and money into the onboarding plan with new tech. I mean, how many companies do you see out there with, multiple different platforms or software to do various niche things in their business? I know people who are developing businesses on creating consolidated platforms. So people don't have to go and waste the time to access 5 to 10 different things, platforms every day, right? I mean, so thinking about the process behind that, right? I mean, because if you have 5, you add another platform for people to access for different things. Well, now there's time wasted in accessing it. How do we cut that down? How do we make sure that they know the most efficient way to do it? Are we storing files where we should be so that they're accessible? There's processes built all around that. And if leadership doesn't consider that on the get-go, your tech innovation you're putting in, you may not realize the ROI that you're really thinking it's going to.
And the symptom is that you've got too much technology. You're overbuying technology. You're trying to buy a technology to address this and not taking into account that. And so you go back and really build your technology. You should build your technology up around what are your core business requirements. And what is it that you need to do to keep your operation lean? But most businesses tend to over-rely and overbuy technology, and they're wasting money as a result of it. So the simplest thing is kind of go back to the basics of your business and ask yourself, what are my core business requirements? What am I trying to accomplish here? What do I need to help me do that? And if it's something that's not helping me get to what I need to be doing, given my mission, then you need to consider jettisoning it. Yeah.
We do a lot with machine shop verticals, and we are CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model certified as an RP, or registered practitioner. And I'm seeing this in my conversations with those businesses, like even these small businesses, they have several or multiple platforms that they use for different things, and it's becoming ingrained in there. They're not really asking the questions, do they really need it? But the cybersecurity platform, or the certification that's being pushed by the DoD and CMMCAB, is forcing them to reevaluate and really understand, do I really need this? Because now there's cybersecurity controls that have to be placed around all those platforms. And in order to get contracts in the future. And so I like it from the aspect that it's promoting that thinking. The bad piece is that if you're a small business, it's a pressure and it's a cost impact to you to become certified. But it is at least pushing the thinking to how do we streamline and become more efficient with this.
Right.
And rightfully so. I mean, we've seen this past weekend, right? I mean, the oil pipeline, Colonial Pipeline was shut down, right, by hackers. So it's imperative that we do that. It's
imperative. Another one of my favorite unsettling statistics, I kind of like being disruptive in a positive way when I'm working with clients, because sometimes when you're positively disruptive, you cause people's eyes to open. And you realize, hey, we're skipping and whistling along here, but we're in the middle of the cemetery.
Right.
And that statistic is this: that in a typical organization, 50 to 75% of the activities that people perform add zero value to the final outcome. So obvious implications for productivity.
Isn't it?
It is very depressing. So a half to 3/4 of the things your people are doing. And what are the root causes typically? Let's go back to not understanding mission, and values, not understanding what the expectations are. I'm not as productive because I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. There are politics, competing interests, silos are in the way within the business. And all those are things that kind of clutter things up and cause people to do things that are absolutely not necessary to the final outcome. And it's not just affecting productivity. There's a direct link ultimately to the customer experience too.
I argue too, going back to something you said earlier, I think this is important, is planning the time for the important things.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I see really, really great organizations do is they plan in time for training, and they plan in time for Kaizen or continuous improvement activities. If you don't plan those things in, one, you're not accurately reflecting what your labor loads are, because these are necessities to continue to be a business in the future. If you're planning your labor times and everything just around like people moving parts or people actually machining parts or doing whatever, you're missing something big there. You got to allocate some time for continuous improvement. You got to allocate time for training, because those are the things that are going to keep your business afloat in the long term.
Being purposeful and intentional, and being proactive, because if you're waiting until a problem occurs and you go to try to fix it, you're going to be behind the 8 ball quite quickly.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. In fact, those things, that point relates to if I had to categorize all the common root causes that I've experienced or I've observed in 40 some years of either being part of it or consulting around it, root causes come down to four. They're typically in 4 categories. 1, poor or lousy communication. 2, there's lack of alignment about what's important, either around mission, vision, and values, or goals, or what's important or expectations. 3rd, the people aren't given proper support to do their jobs correctly. And 4th, we're not doing things intentionally or purposefully. We're just letting things happen, and we'll wait and we'll react rather than proact. I would argue that what I've seen, pretty much any root cause that is causing diminished performance in an organization is going to be in one or more of those 4 categories.
Makes sense. Let me ask you this, because we've talked a lot about experience and things. Is there any particular book that's really moved the needle with you, that really affected how you think about the things you do and how you serve your customers?
At the risk of sounding political, and I'm not, there are actually 2 books that are not in business per se. One is Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It had a profound impact on my life, not so much for the political undertone message of it, but for the notion that we strike relationships with people in business to gain something and act in our own best interest. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that was reinforced by Milton Friedman's book, Free to Choose, and the PBS series that went along with it, that it is people operating out of their own best interests or self-interests is really what drives capitalism and the economy. And I'm a huge fan of Milton Friedman, and I'm in complete agreement that there is yet an economic system in human history that can outperform capitalism. So as you can probably imagine, I'm an ardent capitalist and believe in it. But to answer your question, those 2 books have had a profound impact in terms of how I view and how I operate.
Very good. Yeah, I'm a capitalist myself. I say I'm a little bit more reserved, though, because I do believe that more and more as we talk about it, I think there's a social impact that companies need to start acknowledging, right? I'm very passionate about made in the USA, just like I know you are.
Yeah.
But when we look back at that history of why companies have moved out of the U.S., right? It was capitalistic in nature. It was cost driven.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Money goes where it's going to be treated properly.
where's the loyalty? There's. I think at some point we have to take into context and take into consideration the loyalty of the resources and the people that have brought us from point A to point B.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a basic, underlying human factor, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so companies don't do that. Companies are entities that, we move around and, they're driven to make money. And I get that. A capitalist society, it's a free market. That's going to happen. But more and more, I think these days we need to consider what got you off the ground. Where did those resources come from? I mean, so consider a company that started here in the U.S. and received federal grants or funding for a period of time, right? I think it should be rightfully acknowledged and right for, the federal government to say, hey, if you're going to do this, you are going to commit to being here for X amount of time and employing X amount of people, from a certain area, right? To prevent that outsourcing. I think that's going to come in more and more in focus and discussion as we become more global and these labor rates start to even out. Right?
Start to even out, yeah. And what else is going to drive it too is the companies that treat customers and their employees with respect along the lines you're describing are the ones that are going to take advantage, and they're the ones that are going to survive. Because let's go back to that statistic I mentioned earlier. The number one reason by far customers leave and buy someplace else is because of poor attitude and indifference. And if you're treating your employees incorrectly or improperly, it's going to show up in how they deliver.
Yeah.
Great research by some gentlemen at Harvard around a concept called the service profit chain link. It's great Harvard Business Review article if you can find it, leveraging the service profit chain link. What they found in their research is that loyal and satisfied customers purchase quality products and services that are made and delivered by employees who are loyal and satisfied themselves. So there's a direct, they prove there's a direct correlation between the two. So to your point, you won't remain on the top if you're already there, and you won't get there ultimately if you're not mindful of that connection and you're not treating your people and the community that supports you and your distribution channel partners and your customers. If you're not treating them well, it's going to show up and it's going to affect you ultimately.
Yeah, and I mean,
I agree.
Think about you and I have talked in ad nauseum about this in the past, but one of the easiest ways to cut cost is cut labor, right? Cut people's jobs. It's one of the ones that has the deepest impact, though. I mean, to just an economy and people in general. So when I look at there's other tools out there, right? I mean, the services that both our companies offer relative to process, leadership. There's other avenues out there, they're not being considered in the right way. To me, I think, cutting resources, humans, people have contributed to the company, especially for long periods of time, is something that should be held as a last resort.
Yeah, great article from Business Week, probably around 25 years ago. The title of the article was "Layoffs Are Mismanagement." And to your point, there are plenty of other things that you can do before you get to the layoff stage. And if you're laying off, you haven't done your job from a leadership standpoint. And I would also say, just as a footnote to this part of the conversation, because I know you want to move on, it is possible to do these things, to have compassion for your people and the marketplace and your community and still be in capitalism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They still work. They do work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Mark, where do you see performance advisors in 3 to 5 years?
I have a long bucket list, things I want to do yet in life. So I'm going to be focused on continuing to grow the business. I don't have anybody, I don't have any children to pass the business on to. So at some point down the road, when I turn in my gun and badge, so to speak, I don't know what will happen at that point, but I'm going to continue to grow the business. I enjoy doing what I'm doing. I don't really want to retire per se, because I don't play golf that well. I don't do other things. I kind of enjoy doing what I'm doing. So in 3 to 5 years, I see myself, hopefully on a trajectory that I'm on now and maintaining the trajectory I am in terms of growth, and getting to a point where I can now start checking off some things on my bucket list.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So what's the biggest lesson that you learned throughout your startup experience?
Make sure you always keep an eye on your expenses. And more importantly than profitability per se is maintaining positive cash flow. Those two things can get you in big trouble in a big hurry.
As a small business owner, if you're not opening QuickBooks up every morning or whatever platform you use, just checking to make sure you have cash flow to run your business, that has to be a dailiness habit, right? And follow up on the items that are causing pain. It really kind of, points out or illustrates where you're spending and, where you're spending needlessly maybe, or maybe where you need to spend more with purpose. And obviously keeping an eye on where you're getting paid and not getting paid. Definitely informs your decisions as well. But I think that's one thing it's hard for startups and entrepreneurs to really get in the habit of, is really watching that bank account. And the owner the person who starts that business, that's your responsibility.
Yes,
right?
It is. Yeah, it's very, very, you can fall into what I call the stage of hubris, where you're excited about, you're seeing growth and good things are happening, and you got some high balances in your bank accounts, and you're seeing some profitability. But at the same time, your cash flow may be not what you really think it is. Sure. And your expenses are getting out of hand. And quite often, for a lot of businesses, they don't realize it's a problem until it's too late.
Well, back to the dolphin effect, right? I mean, because your first year in business, if you haven't been doing this business for a period of time, maybe it's a new industry that you ventured into, and you've brought some skills from another industry. If you don't understand the seasonality of that industry, and maybe you're cash flow heavy now, and later on you're not going to be, and you're not paying attention to that, and there's no gas in the tank. Well, guess what? That's
great. Exactly. Yeah. Repair before failure, folks.
That's right. Be careful when you start making those big bucks in the beginning. Don't draw everything out right at the start. Leave some gas in the tank.
Right. Well,
so you and I have talked too about giving back to the community. I think it's extremely important. There's various ways that different businesses do it, whether it's your local, small business community or whatnot. How do you measure the impact that you have, and what have you done to give back to the community?
Yeah, three things that I do. I'm a trustee for my church out in Salmonac, Illinois, where I grew up. It's a church I grew up in. So I'm a trustee. So we worry about the financial affairs of the church, which is a bit of a challenge for any church right now. Sure. So you learn how to apply some of the things you learn in business to try to help, manage the expense side of things. Right. I'm also on the board of the West Suburban Alumni Association for the University of Illinois here in the Chicago area. But the group that I have spent a lot of time with over the last several years, and it is one that's born out of seeing the impacts of mental illness and behavioral health issues in the community. It's a big problem. There's a stigma around mental illness in our society. Yes. I was introduced to family counseling service in Aurora, Illinois, several years ago, probably about 10 years ago. And their mission is to provide behavioral health and mental health support for individuals and families in the community. In the Aurora area, Kane County and Kimball County. The agency has been around since the 1920s. We're going on 100 years being around. Wow. And it is my passion for supporting them is because we have a real challenge with mental illness and behavioral health issues in our society. Substance abuse, stuff brought on by substance abuse, broken families, domestic violence. And so this agency helps with all those things. We have very accomplished therapists that help. I'm on the board of that agency. I'm a past board president. So I really devote a lot of my time to helping them because they provide a service that a lot of people maybe don't want to talk about, but I think I would venture to say that everybody who's going to be watching this can think about someone they know, either in their family or they know among their friends or colleagues, who's had issues with any of those things I just mentioned. And there are places you can go for help. Family Counseling Service is one of them. They do a great job. They have an excellent leadership team. and doing great work in that area. So, and it's as I say, it's a subject that needs more attention, more discussion. So, it's a good agency.
I appreciate you.
It's a way to give back there.
I appreciate you for being involved in that. And I think you're right. I think during this time, coming out of the pandemic and everything, there's a lot of people who have been really quiet and kind of absorbing some of these issues. And there's support and there's help out there.
Yes.
Right? I think we've seen some of it manifest here recently in some violence, that's happened in national news. So I think there needs to be more of a focus on it. So I appreciate you helping shine the flashlight on that.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. There's a lot of work yet to be done, but one step at a time, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, the more attention and awareness we can bring around things like that, right, the more impact we can have. So. Yeah,
what gets talked about in this world is what gets done. So the more that we can have a conversation as a culture, as a society, or as a community about mental health and the impact that it's having on our children and our families, if we're not willing to accept we've got a problem, it's going to be hard to fix it.
Absolutely. You gotta tell the truth to yourself and acknowledge the truth in order to make progress.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Mark, how can someone listening to this podcast or viewing this podcast today, how can they help you and support your business, Performance Advisors?
Well, of course, my doors are open for people, for businesses, primarily in the B2B space, who are looking for help with people and process performance issues and looking for solving those root causes that are, creating barriers that get in the way of a good performing business. That's my core business. Sure. But beyond that, I am a big believer in the give to receive or others focused mentality. So, the ask I would have would be, anyone who is interested in having me speak on a number of topics that I'm very comfortable with, and I do pro bono speaking engagements on things like business improvement, how to improve the effectiveness of your incentive programs and efforts to recognize your people, the 5 principles of marketing, the 5 you need to get right in order for your market to be successful, and a couple of 3 other topics that I speak on. I'm always looking for opportunities to speak. And it's a way for me to give back to the community or the group I'm speaking to. I don't charge to do these presentations. It's just a way for me to impart some of that 40 years of stuff I got stuffed up here in my brain that I'm happy to share with people.
Sure.
So I'm willing to do it for pretty much any kind of an organization. You can find me on freespeakers.org. It's freespeakers.org, Chicago. I'm on there, or people can contact me directly.
Very good. I'm glad you mentioned the website because I was going to ask how people could access you. So really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast today, Mark. We covered a lot of ground, covered a lot of great topics. Really has been a pleasure talking to you today. For the people out there, if they want to get a hold of you, they want to have further discussions, you mentioned about the speaker piece on freespeaker.org. Yeah. What other avenues can they get a hold of you?
Well, best way to reach me very quickly is my phone number is 630-882-9107. It's 630-882-9107. Or email me at Mark J as in James, Mark J at Perform Advisors. So Perform Advisors with an O, one word, .com.
Very good. Very good.
2 best ways to reach me. And even if you just want to ask a question or have want to bounce a thought off, again, I'm not interested in ringing the cash register off the bat. I mean, one of my core values for my business and myself is always diagnose first.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So it was a pleasure being here. I appreciate the time. Yeah.
Before we sign off, any parting words of wisdom for our small business owners, entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, go back. It's never a bad time to go back and look at the basics of your business. Look for things that are getting in the way along the lines that we've been talking about in this conversation, the things that are cluttering what you're doing, the activities that people are performing that are adding no value to the final outcome. What are you doing to make sure that the customer experience is a good one and a positive one? Examine those things that might be making customers feel like they're not welcome or appreciated. And that involves going back and just looking at the basics of your business, your people, your processes, and how you're doing your business. Just go back to the basics.
I love that. Thank you, Mark. And to our listeners, be well, be safe, and be productive. If you want to recommend somebody to appear on the podcast as a guest, please email us at info@opsqc.com. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, please reach out to us at the same email. We'd love to have your support.